questions. Why can't the European Union leave the Sahel alone? They've called it the poorest region on Earth. They've warned that it's too dangerous, too unstable. And when the military took over Burkina Faso, they were the first to step back, cutting diplomatic ties, turning their backs. But now, they're back. Suddenly, EU representatives are flying into Ouagadougou, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, and meeting behind closed doors with Burkina Faso's Prime Minister. 3 days. That's how long they stayed. 3 intense days trying to patch things up. So the question is, why? What changed? Why is the European Union, after branding Burkina Faso a military dictatorship, now eager to deepen relations with that very same regime?
In recent months, a striking shift has taken place in relations between the European Union and 3 West African nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. After years of diplomatic freezes, sanctions, and public condemnation, European officials are now signaling a willingness to re-engage. In some quarters, the change in tone has been described as an attempt at reconciliation. In others, it has been framed more starkly as an appeal for forgiveness. For the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the moment is being watched closely. These countries, now led by military-backed authorities, have spent the past several years redefining their place in the international system. Their break with traditional Western partners was not sudden, but the result of long-simmering tensions over security, sovereignty, and political legitimacy. This report examines why the European Union appears to be changing course, what is driving its renewed interest in the Sahel, and why many in the region remain deeply skeptical of Europe's intentions. To understand the present moment, it is necessary to revisit how relations between the EU and the Sahel deteriorated so sharply in the first place. For more than a decade, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were central pillars of Europe's engagement strategy in West Africa. The region was viewed as critical to European security, particularly in relation to terrorism, irregular migration, and transnational crime. European governments invested heavily in military cooperation, development aid, and political partnerships, often framing their involvement as support for stability and democratic governance. However, on the ground, the outcomes were mixed at best. Despite billions of euros in assistance and the presence of foreign military forces, insecurity worsened across much of the Sahel. Armed groups expanded their reach, civilian casualties increased, and public trust in both local governments and foreign partners eroded. In Mali, frustration boiled over in 2020, when the military seized power following mass protests against corruption and insecurity. Similar dynamics unfolded in Burkina Faso and Niger in subsequent years. Each takeover was met with swift condemnation from the European Union, which suspended aid, imposed sanctions, and demanded a rapid return to civilian rule. From Brussels' perspective, these measures were intended to uphold democratic norms. From the Sahelian capitals, they were perceived as punitive and dismissive of local realities. Public opinion in all 3 countries shifted decisively against Western influence. Demonstrations targeted French and European symbols, accusing former partners of failed security strategies and political interference. The narrative of partnership gave way to one of resentment. In response, the new authorities in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger began to look elsewhere. They strengthened ties with non-Western actors, including Russia, China, and regional partners within Africa. Military cooperation agreements were reoriented, foreign troops were asked to leave, and new alliances were announced. In 2023, the 3 countries went further still, forming the Alliance of Sahel States, a political and security bloc aimed at asserting collective sovereignty. For Europe, this represented a significant strategic setback. The Sahel is not just a distant region of concern. Its stability has direct implications for Europe, particularly in terms of migration flows, counterterrorism, and access to resources. As European influence declined, policymakers began to reassess whether isolation and pressure were achieving their intended goals. It is against this backdrop that the EU's recent outreach must be understood. European officials have stopped short of issuing formal apologies. However, their language has softened noticeably. Statements now emphasize dialogue, mutual respect, and the need to rebuild trust. Sanctions are being reviewed. Channels of communication that were once closed are being reopened. For some observers, this marks a pragmatic adjustment. Europe, they argue, recognizes that disengagement has only pushed Sahel states further away, diminishing its influence while empowering rivals. Others see something more calculated. Critics in the Sahel question whether Europe's change of tone is driven by genuine reflection or by necessity. One major factor is security. Despite the withdrawal of European troops, instability in the Sahel has not remained confined to the region. Armed groups continue to operate across borders, and concerns persist about the potential spillover into coastal West Africa and beyond. European intelligence agencies remain deeply concerned about the long-term implications. Another factor is migration. The Sahel remains a key transit corridor for migrants traveling toward North Africa and Europe. European migration policies have long relied on cooperation with Sahelian governments to manage borders and disrupt trafficking networks. With relations strained, that cooperation has weakened. Resource competition also looms large. The Sahel and surrounding regions are rich in strategic minerals increasingly vital to global supply chains. As Europe seeks to reduce dependence on external suppliers, access to African resources has taken on renewed urgency. Taken together, these pressures have forced a reassessment in Brussels. But for leaders in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, memory is long. They recall years of partnership that, in their view, failed to deliver security or prosperity. They remember sanctions imposed during moments of political transition, which they argue harmed ordinary citizens more than political elites. And they are acutely aware of what they see as double standards in how coups and democratic backsliding are treated globally. As a result, the EU's outreach is being met with caution. Officials in the Sahel have emphasized that any renewed relationship must be based on respect for sovereignty and non-interference. They insist that decisions about governance and security will be made domestically, not dictated from abroad. Public opinion reinforces this stance. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, there is widespread skepticism toward Western intentions. Social media platforms and local media outlets are filled with commentary questioning whether Europe's overtures are a trap, a means of regaining influence without addressing past grievances. Analysts note that trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. The European Union faces a dilemma. If it pushes too hard, it risks reinforcing perceptions of neocolonialism. If it retreats entirely, it cedes influence in a strategically important region. Finding a middle path requires acknowledging past failures while adapting to a new geopolitical reality. This is not only a challenge for Europe. The situation also tests the Sahelian governments themselves. Having asserted independence from Western partners, they must now demonstrate that alternative alliances can deliver tangible improvements in security and economic conditions. The Alliance of Sahel States represents an ambitious attempt to chart a new course. Yet it faces enormous obstacles, including limited resources, ongoing insurgencies, and international isolation. Whether renewed engagement with the EU could complement this effort, or undermine it, remains an open question. What is clear is that the balance of power has shifted. Africa's relationship with external partners is no longer defined solely by aid and conditionality. Governments are increasingly willing to diversify alliances, negotiate from a position of confidence, and reject terms they view as unfavorable. For Europe, this requires a fundamental rethink. The era in which Brussels could set the rules of engagement unilaterally is fading. In its place is a more contested, multipolar environment, where influence must be earned rather than assumed. As discussions continue behind closed doors, both sides are aware that missteps could have lasting consequences. For the Sahel, the priority is stability and dignity. For Europe, it is security and relevance. Whether these interests can be reconciled, or whether suspicion will prevail, will shape the future of EU-Africa relations far beyond Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.